Hello and welcome back to the Simplifiers podcast, where we take topics in business and in life and simplify them. Now, friends, I know that you are probably like myself and the special guest today. You got 80 bazillion things on your to-do list. You're running in every which direction. You got kids to pick up from the school run, and oh yeah, you got to make some money at this business that you've started to run, right? So how do you do it all? Well, my special guest today is going to flip all of that paradigm on its head and start to show us how we can do less. As an entrepreneur, best-selling author, speaker, and mother, Kate Northrup has built a multimedia digital empire with her husband, Mike Watts, and it reaches hundreds of thousands globally. They are committed to supporting ambitious women to light up the world without burning themselves out in the process. And at the core, she teaches time and energy management practices that result in saving time, making more money, and experiencing less stress. All of those things, yes, yes, and yes for me. She's featured in Women's Health, Yahoo Finance, The Today Show, Huffington Post, and more. You know, Kate just wants to show us today how we can do less and have more in life. Sign me up, Kate. I'd like to welcome to the Simplifiers podcast, Kate Northrup. Hey, Kate.
Hi.
Kate, I'm so thrilled that you're here because I have to say, after reading your book, Do Less, which, by the way, congratulations to you. It's out today. Amazing job.
Thank you.
I feel like we are kindred spirits, like lost at birth a very, very long time ago. I'm reading through your book and I'm dog-earing each and every page and going, well, okay, if I dog-ear every page, then I can't remember what all the good stuff is. There's so much in this book and so much that speaks to my heart and to I know to a lot of our listeners. So where do we begin? Why does it seem like we as female small business owners are totally addicted to busyness?
Well, because we were raised in a culture that is addicted to busyness, and that's multifold. One of them is because we live in a patriarchy, which celebrates the traits of the masculine over the traits of the feminine. And by the way, neither the masculine or the feminine are better or worse than the other. Mm-hmm. But a society becomes unbalanced when one is celebrated over the other. So this is not me saying anything about men. I love men.
Yes.
The masculine traits are doing, are production, are action, and are going out there and making things happen. The feminine traits are receptivity, allowing more stillness, more spaciousness. And so we have been programmed to think that the only valuable thing is doing. Yeah. And then the other thing that's going on there is that being busy can be a numbing behavior, which is a whole other thing because, you know, we numb because we don't want to feel things that are uncomfortable. Yeah. And so working all the time and staying in motion and being busy and being overscheduled prevents us from being in the stillness where we actually come face to face with ourselves, which can be really joyful, but also really uncomfortable.
And really scary too. I mean, I can't think of the last networking event I went to, saw my friend Debbie. She goes, hey, how's it going? And the instinctive reaction, you go, oh, I'm so busy. And then she goes and mirrors back like, oh, I'm so busy too. I had to do blah, 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 blah. And it's a trap. All of it's a trap, right?
It's a total trap because I read Bronnie Ware's book, The 5 Biggest Regrets of the Dying. And this is a book where she was a palliative care nurse and she put together the 5 biggest regrets of people that she had worked with. And that none of them were, I wish I had worked harder. None of them were, I wish I had gotten more done. They were things like, I wish I had honored who I truly am. I wish I had lived according to my own expectations and instead of according to others. I wish I'd kept in touch with the people I love. So our addiction to busyness is disconnecting us from what matters.
Yeah. And I remember when you mentioned that in the book, I was like, well, yeah, of course. It's a stark contrast of what we all seem to be programmed to strive for. I mean, I grew up in the late 70s, early 80s. And, you know, I was a kid of the generation that, you know, you work for the trophy and you get a football or a goal in soccer and you go eat ice cream. Like it's all about the achievement, the A++ report card. And that's how you know your worth. And so what I think is really interesting about your book is you're saying, well, hang on. Okay. Well, that's old thinking. Let's flip this on its lid. Like, is that still serving us now? The answer's no, right?
The answer is no. And now I just also want to say I'm really ambitious and I do plenty of things. And so it's not,
You're not just chilling on the couch.
I am not. And people often read the title Do Less and they think I'm saying do nothing.
Yes.
I am not saying that. I am saying do less and yet get just as good, if not better results. And it's really important to know that that we can still have achievement. We can still, but more importantly, we can have fulfillment through being more mindful and more conscious of the way we're using our time. And that's what this is really about.
Well, and the first big aha for me was on, I think, page 12 of your book, where you really start talking about the traditional qualities of masculine versus feminine. And I, like you, again, kindred spirits, I believe we all have this inside us, the masculine side and the feminine side. And the first aha was when you said, well, hey, the masculine are built physiologically to follow a 24-hour cycle versus the women, we're built to follow more or less a 28-day cycle. Can you tell me more about what you mean by that?
Yeah, so that's the way our hormones work as human beings. Men's hormones cycle every 24 hours, women's hormones cycle every 28 days. And what's really important about that is the entire calendar is set up as a 24-hour calendar, which is obvious because the sun rises and sets. So I'm cool with that.
Right.
But the idea of time management systems, every time management system I've always followed has the assumption that you're supposed to be the same as you were yesterday and ideally also do more.
Right.
And the problem with that for women is not that we are less than. The problem is that our productivity is spread out in these 4 phases over a month as opposed to over a day. And so I, like many other women, had every planner and every time management, system known to man. And yet none of them really felt like they worked for me. Like I always felt like I was putting a square peg into a round hole until I essentially created my own that was based on how my body worked. And I also was very inspired by Elisa Vitti, who wrote the book Woman Code. So I want to make sure I give her a shout out.
Yeah.
And really looking at how can we organize our time according to how our hormones are affecting our brain. And there's actually 4 phases. Do you want me to get into that?
Yeah. And let me just say, for those that are listening, your mind is about to get blown. If you've never heard this stuff, I mean, like literally it goes, what? This has been there this whole time? So break it down for us, Kate. What are the 4 phases?
It's wild that this is not common knowledge.
It blows my mind. Go on.
This is how every female body works. And by the way, also this cycle I'm about to share with you is responsible for human life. It's where we all came from. So we all know about having your period, right? But that's only one of 4 phases. And so the other ones are, I like to think about them in alignment with the seasons because it's the same energy as the 4 seasons, and we're all familiar with that. So there's a springtime energy. It's the follicular phase. It's right after your period, and that's a time of new beginnings and planting seeds and fresh starts. It's a really good time for brainstorming and planning and initiating projects.
Yeah.
Your brain is wired for it. Then there's the summertime of your cycle, which is the ovulation part. We know about that. Certainly if you're trying to get pregnant or you're trying not to get pregnant, you're familiar with ovulation. And it is our peak receptivity time. It's actually our time where we'll be the most fluent to communicate. We will be the best at presenting, being out there. It's a very extroverted time. And then the next phase is the luteal phase. And this phase gets a particularly bad rap in our culture because of PMS. And women are told that there's something wrong with them when they want to go within and be more quiet and be by themselves. But it's totally normal. The entire planet has autumn and winter and spring and summer. Spring and summer are the outward times. Autumn and winter are the inward times. Our bodies are made of nature. It makes complete sense that our bodies would inspire us to also be outward half the time and inward half the time. It just makes sense.
Yeah.
And yet our culture so celebrates being outward all the time that we skip out on or we judge and find ourselves wrong for the times when we want to be more internal. And so the luteal phase is actually the workhorse phase of your cycle. It's longer than the other phases, and it's designed that way so you can get stuff done. It's a really one of my coaching clients today said she makes a luteal list. So during the rest of the month for like the detail oriented stuff that just kind of like you just got to put in the work, she saves it for her luteal phase when she knows that her brain is going to be primed to want to be working on detailed solo tasks.
Genius. Yes.
And then there's the menstrual phase. And that, of course, we're familiar with, but that's the winter time of your cycle. And that's a really, your brain will actually be the most wired for intuition at that time. Your left and right hemispheres are cross-pollinating the most. So you'll get your best ideas. It's also the time when you are most deeply in touch with your truth, with your intuition. It's a great time to ask yourself the big questions about your life and about your business.
And let me just say, like, when I started to read through this, and I really feel like I've come to an awakening of this knowledge, this deep core divine feminine, if you will, knowledge only in the last year, listening to your work, seeing your videos, and reading this book now. I think what's interesting is when I was a teenager, when I first got my period, I was like always like shocked, like, oh my God, it just happened again. Like, oh, I'm caught out without a tampon again. And I feel like I've been doing that for the last 30 some odd years. I mean, at the time of recording today, I'm 41. And I feel like up until maybe when I turned 41, it was always like that. There's never this is that phase going on. And thinking that there was any alignment to my productivity or my sharpness or how I could route it into my work. So how is this information shaped how you work and how you launch things out into the world?
Well, I think it's really important to note that we can't, make the world exactly the way we want it to go. And so like your kids are going to have stuff going on. There's going to be trade shows. There's going to be, there are times you have photo shoots. There's times when you just have to show up at that time, and that is what it is. And that's how my life works too. So I just want to say that I think it's so important to track our cycle because it's a very practical way of loving ourselves. It's a very practical way of honoring ourselves. And it's a very practical way to increase your productivity and your momentum creatively. Because if you can pepper just like 5 to 10% of your tasks during the appropriate week with that category of tasks, you're going to be amazed by how well you do. And like, let's say, for example, while you're having your period, it's not the time for you to be super verbal and articulate. So like maybe don't record all of your videos that week. So there are things you can control. There are things you can't control. But the way I use this more, and not even more, but at the same time is with something I created based on it called the Upward Cycle of Success, where I then took it and extrapolated it to project planning and looking at project management and what are the tasks that are required of my projects in each one of these phases. So that springtime phase I call emergence of a project when you're in brainstorming, planning, outlining, initiating. Then the ovulation time of a project would be called visibility. It's when you're launching, it's when you're running the event, it's when you're at the photo shoot, it's when you're, out there. And then the culmination phase is the same as the luteal. It's when you're wrapping things up, working on the detail work, invoicing your clients and doing the editing of the photos, that kind of thing. And then the fertile void, this is the one that most entrepreneurs skip. It's the pause. So entrepreneurs, we have a tendency to go from emergence to visibility to emergence to visibility. And then we wonder why we're completely burned out. And it's because we have not been taking a tip from Mother Nature. We have not been taking a tip from our bodies. We've not built in the pause. And when you don't build in the pause, not only will your body fall apart, and we've all experienced this before, your creativity will actually decrease and decline. Your ideas won't be as good, and your work won't get the same impact, and you won't have the same results. But when you take that pause, when you go full culmination mode, really finishing what you start, and then pause for a second, then you will be able to have a much more plentiful, abundant harvest, but fewer harvests, if that makes sense. Now I'm mixing metaphors, but you know what I'm saying.
No, I totally hear you. And I mean, it really did come back to me and it sort of hit me in like a thing, nub in my throat when I read it in your book of page 18, I believe, where you were starting to realize in your own life, like, is accomplishment really where it's at? If I'm just going for the next thing, the next thing, the next thing, you'd ask three really powerful questions. Who am I if I'm not doing anything? Who am I if I'm not producing? And who am I if I'm not in action? And, I have to say, kindred spirit, I've certainly asked myself these questions as well. And it's where you have to start unlinking your worth to your how many things you've got checked off your to-do list. I mean, how do you start to pull that apart and reclaim yourself?
I think that's a lifelong practice because we have to unlearn the way we were raised. I mean, if you listening or anything like me, you were, raised to believe that your achievements are the most important thing. And that's what's celebrated. And so to unravel that, it is a daily practice of being present. I mean, I wish it was like a sexier answer, but the truth is that the moments of our life that are the most meaningful are the ones that we actually show up for.
Yeah.
And when we're always chasing achievement, we're not actually showing up for where we are. And so it's a practice of noticing what's in front of you, using your five senses. What are you feeling? What are you hearing? What are you smelling? What are you touching? I find for myself, connecting with my breath whenever I'm noticing I'm not in the moment is the best way to drop back in. And the only way, I think Danny Shapiro, who's a writer, said something along the lines of the only way to fully inhabit our lives is to fully inhabit the present moment. And just how can the only way to detach from that addiction to achievement is to be here.
Yeah.
Whatever we're doing.
Yeah. In this moment. Yeah.
That's it. Because it's all we have.
So can I go back to the upward cycle of success? Because I think this is such a fascinating concept. You describe it like a spiral staircase going upwards. And you mentioned earlier, there's the three phases, or actually four: emergence, visibility, culmination, and then that fertile void. How do you sit with the fertile void, though? It's, because you have been, well, let me just say, I feel when I've just done this amazing big thing, and then you sit there and you go, okay, well, what's next? People are going to be looking to me to do what's next. I mean, you mentioned in your book that you kind of had that season as well after you wrote your first book, and then coming up with, well, what is my next thing? Can you talk to us a little bit about the vulnerability behind that?
Yeah, it is. I mean, our culture loves to categorize. Our culture, we love to label. We really like to be able to define what things are and to have, identify them. And the fertile void is really that place of void, which means it looks like there's nothing happening, even though there's a lot happening under the surface. It's like the winter time. And for me, I went into a fertile void in between the publishing of my last book, Money, A Love Story, and then when I got the idea for this book. And it was a good 3 years of really not knowing what I was doing. And from the outside, I will be perfectly honest, I'm sure it seemed like I knew what I was doing. We were running a high 6-figure business. We were launching things. I mean, things were working. So it doesn't, by the way, fertile void does not mean you're like watching reality TV all day on the couch. It could.
Yeah.
It might. For me, that wasn't my reality. I run my own business with my husband. We don't have an alternate source of income.
Right.
So it wasn't like, okay, now I'm going to take a complete break. But there will be times maybe like for a maternity leave, for example. So that was a by accident fertile void. But then for my recent, I have a daughter who's almost 1. And I knew her birth was coming, obviously. And so I planned a 5-month fertile void so I could take time off. And so here's what I'm recommending with Do Less. I'm recommending that we build in the time for the fertile void as opposed to having the fertile void take us by surprise. Now, by the way, we can't control life. So sometimes it's going to take us by surprise. But like your fertile void could be, when you get back from a speaking engagement, just having a day where you don't have any appointments. Like, I'm not saying you have to take years off. This is not an extreme practice. You can do this in small ways, or it could be, for example, my husband and I just went away, but the two of us for the first time since our second daughter was born. And rather than rush right home, our flight got in at midnight and we had some hotel points. So we booked a night at a hotel so we wouldn't have to get in at midnight and then wake up at 4 with the baby. And so that was like a little fertile void time where we just had a pause and we could reintegrate into life instead of like being shot like a cannon into
Yeah.
life.
Well,
So that's all I'm talking about.
yeah, and I appreciate that because I think a lot of our listeners are small business owners, and it's not like you can just be like, well, maternity leave, no one's paying for it besides me. So, having that strategic mind to think this is what's headed, coming down the pipeline. How do I build in that time off to breathe, to nourish myself, to reconnect? And be strategic, like you say, rather than reactive, being proactive. If you know your clients are all on holiday and taking vacation in the month of August, hey, maybe August is a good time for you also to blip off for a couple of weeks and get yourself on a beach or just get yourself away from your computer and getting reconnected with your family and friends. Yeah, being intentional. I think that that's at the core of what you're saying, right?
Totally.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about what egg wisdom is all about? Because
Yeah.
I love this.
So, egg wisdom is a concept invented by my mom, Dr. Christian Northrup. And so I grew up hearing about egg wisdom. And I asked her if it was okay to put it in the book because I just feel like more women need to know about this. And
Yes.
she was like, "Of course, there's no one on earth I'd rather have teach this than you." So,
Oh,
egg wisdom is the wisdom of our bodies. It's our attraction factor. So, um, when the egg is released once a month at ovulation, it sits there and it waits for the sperm, if the sperm is coming. And the egg actually releases a material, a hormone that actually makes the sperm swim faster towards her. So she actually puts out a signal that it makes it clear where she is and that she's available, and she speeds up the sperm moving towards her. Then when the sperm comes, she actually decides which one of them she lets in. So they don't get to decide. She decides who she'll be having. And then when she picks the sperm, if there's something wrong with it or whatever, she has the ability to repair the sperm's DNA and also enough nourishment for both of them to travel down the fallopian tube and make it all the way on their journey to embed in the uterine lining, which can take several days. So the metaphor here is the egg sits in the power of her desire and puts out a very clear signal for what she wants.
yes.
And she actually has the ability to not only speed up the rate at which her desire is coming towards her, also she gets to decide which one she's going to experience. And then also she has the ability to make it even better and to really feed both things, everything, make everything better as she goes. What's really important about egg wisdom is that the egg is not like running around the uterus looking for the sperm, wondering if the sperm is coming, freaking out, calling her girlfriends, texting 10 times, and then regretting it. She's not running around looking. She really sits and attracts. And biologically speaking, at ovulation, we actually are at our most attractive. So we do release pheromones that make us our most attractive. And even with no makeup and dirty hair and in your sweats, like women report getting more attention at their ovulation, and waitresses report having their highest tips during ovulation. So this is just how we are wired, and then we can use it to our advantage. You don't have to be the egg only at ovulation. You could be the egg all month long. Although I do have a friend who does a special meditation at ovulation and puts out her desire, and she's been getting miraculous results.
I love
like,
it.
like calls out of the blue for really big opportunities.
Yes.
So that's egg wisdom. It's to remember that, yes, we do all need to be in action. I do believe we need to meet the universe halfway. But when we are running ragged, overproducing, over functioning, I do believe we get out of touch with our ability to attract what we want. And it has to be a dance between both. And most of us have an overly developed masculine and need to practice egg wisdom more often. The leaning back, the receiving, the allowing things to be what they are, the trusting that what is for us is coming.
Yeah. And again, all of this is hardwired in us. If we are women listening to this episode or you identify as women, this is already hardwired into you. And I think for me, the aha is like realizing, wait a second, if this is already in me, then how do I continue to bring this and invite this kind of energy into how I run my business, how I run team meetings, how I lead the team itself. I mean, these are deep wisdom that I think is just, it just makes me giggle. The part where you mentioned like, oh yeah, and on top of all that, she packs a picnic basket. I mean, of course she does, right? This is what is deep within us. And
This is the feminine principle.
yeah, this is the divine feminine that I think many people are talking about. One person in particular that comes to my mind is Lacey Haynes in London. She is doing incredible work to remind people of the divine feminine and what already is sit inside you. So this is part of reclaiming your time, reclaiming your schedule, because I feel like we just want to add more, 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 more. If we do more, we'll seem more busy and more productive, and people will take us seriously. I think that's the words that are sitting in a lot of our minds as small business owners. Even the word small sort of diminishes what it is we do and how many clients that we serve out there in the world. So tell us more about the book itself. There are 14 experiments, by the way, you guys, ways that you can simply and practically integrate the do less practice into your work and life. And I really want to take a deep dive into 2 of the experiments on today's episode. So let's dive into experiment number 4, checking your vitals. What do you mean by that, and how do we implement it?
Yeah, so your vitals are the vital few things that you and only you can do. Mm-hmm. So I combine this with Pareto's principle, the 80-20 rule. So the 80-20 rule says that 80% of your results are going to come from 20% of your actions. This is true for all of us also. 80% of your revenue will come from 20% of your clients. 80% of your headaches will come from a different 20% of your clients.
Right.
And so it's really important to always be looking at our businesses from the 80-20 perspective. I think you can also to some degree look at your life through it, but it's like a little bit more qualitative instead of quantitative.
Yeah.
So what I recommend is really looking at, okay, what are the few things that only you and only you can do? And then most likely those things are going to line up and be the 20% that's going to give you 80% of the results.
Yep.
So here's how you can do it as an exercise is take an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, draw a line down the middle of it, and write on one side of that piece of paper your biggest business wins to this date. Mm-hmm. So it could be scoring your biggest client. It could be a media mention. It could be, a booth at a really big trade fair, like whatever. And then on the left-hand side, you would write down the tasks and activities that you do on a regular basis in your business that take up your time. And all you need to do is then draw a line from the big wins on the right-hand side of the piece of paper to the task that led to that big win on the left-hand side.
Yep.
And you will very quickly see that most of the tasks on your left-hand side of the piece of paper have not led directly to a big win. And it gives you immediate information for what you can start to phase out of.
Yeah. What is your 20% that you need to focus on? And what are the 80% that you need to delegate off? And to build one step further with our mutual friend, Danielle Laporte, I mean, when you start connecting that 20% to the things that give you your core desired feelings, like really light you up inside, then you're in the magic zone, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And, then you can take it even a step further because I am a total scheduling nerd and look at when do you feel your best during the day? When are you your most focused? So for me, I'm at my best from 8 a.m. to 12 p.m. most of the time. Yeah. It doesn't mean I'm no good in the afternoon, but in terms of creation, like content creation, those are my sweet hours in the morning. So I do not take any meetings before 12, ideally. And I take the best part of my day for the most important activities. And that has served me really well. And I really recommend having a clear boundary around your schedule like that.
Yeah, and I think it also comes with a bit of experimentation as well. Like you may not know when your best and most productive times are. So take the 30 days ahead and say, well, right, how productive am I? How awake is my brain from 8 a.m. to noon? And then how am I doing from noon to 4? You know, you just never know. I'm curious, Kate, when you had your daughters, did that change at all? Because obviously when they're little bitty babies, you're not sleeping at night. So did your productive or most awake times shift with when they were little?
They're still pretty little. I have a 3.5-year-old and an 11-month-old.
Yeah.
So I'm still pretty in it. And I would say, yeah, as the afternoon goes on, I'm noticing, especially since having my second baby,
Yeah.
I'm just, I like, I'm no good for writing
Yep.
or like, just doesn't work. And so I don't know, before I had kids, like I just had no structure to my
Yeah.
life. I could just do whatever I wanted whenever I wanted
And go,
because
go, go, go,
I could
go.
get things done at 11 at night. I could get things
Right.
done on weekends. It just didn't matter. And so my kids have given me this gift of needing to condense my work hours and really get ruthless about what I allow into my schedule.
Yeah.
And so that's really where Do Less came from.
Yeah. So I love that. I love experiment for writing it down on the sheet of paper, really getting visual and saying, okay, what am I spending my time in? And laser focusing in on the right things that light you up and are actually delivering the biggest results to push the needle forward in your business. Okay. So experiment number 7, of course, I couldn't not cover this one. It's all about simplifying. Talk us through this one.
So simplifying is really, I mean, it's very much Marie Kondo, looking at your life and asking what belongs here, what doesn't, what sparks joy, what's draining.
Yeah.
And looking at ways that here's I love my favorite examples of simplification come from challenging the cultural expectations of like what we have to do because this is what people do.
Right.
So a lot of them came from one of them or several came from my friend Sarah, who has 2 kids. She lives with her husband in a relatively small apartment in Brooklyn, and she just like only has 3 pairs of shoes because she just thought life would be simpler if shoes weren't a big thing. So she has a pair of flip-flops, she has a pair of like dress up flats, and she has a pair of sneakers.
Yeah.
And that's it. And they simplified their wardrobe. They both got rid of half of their clothes so that everything could fit in one bureau. She doesn't wear makeup. She just did all these things to cut down on all the extraneous stuff in her life. And
Yeah.
I was very inspired by that. Now, I am not a minimalist in that way. So like
Yeah.
I'm just going to be perfectly honest. I'm not going to get rid of my shoes and whatever. But there are things, for example, I have friends whose kids are like at T-ball and then soccer and ballet class and gymnastics. We don't do any classes right
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
My life is really full and I don't want to also have to show up somewhere with my kids. It's just too much and they don't care.
Yeah.
So that's a simplification that I believe in. But it's really to look at your life and ask what things on my schedule and on my plate are aggravating that are actually not necessary for the health and well-being of my family and for the revenue in my business,
Yeah.
and just get rid of them.
Yeah. And I think that as your kids get older, mine are 8 and 10, they now have voices in the conversation. So it's it's a
More
whole other ball,
complicated. Absolutely.
whole other ball game. But what we've learned in our family and what's working for us is we have regular family meetings. And sometimes the kids will call the family meeting. They'll say, hey, Mom, we really need to have a family meeting soon because I want to talk about blah, 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 blah. So, my therapist actually, the way she describes it is beautiful. It's to think about each person in your family as their own individual train on their own individual train track, right? And the common goal is that we're all headed down this path, this journey together, but we're each in our individual trains. So when we each can say, with our outside voice what we want and need in life, and then we each as a 4-person team can help each other get that, it becomes very clear, well, do we need all this other stuff? Does this really give us what we want and need individually, right? Do we really need to spend money and go out to eat every single week, or could we save that money for a bigger trip that we all 4 really get excited about? And I think that's at the core of simplifying as well. That's where I think it's really interesting to follow through.
Yeah, and what's required is to be really conscious of, am I doing this thing because it's necessary or because it
Yes.
brings me joy, or am I doing this thing because this is what people do? And
Right.
it gets very dangerous when we're living our lives because we're doing things that people just do. And
Right.
that's really the call to look at where you can simplify, is to stop living according to society's expectations.
Yes. So this all comes back to reclaiming your time, reclaiming your energy, especially if you're feeling a little crispy around the edges and a bit worn out. I highly recommend anyone that's listening to read this book. It's called Do Less, A Revolutionary Approach to Time Management for Busy Moms. And side note, Kate, this applies to everybody. I mean, it's
Totally.
not just for moms, but anybody out there that's just tired of striving and hustling and grinding. Ugh. And wants something different. And I believe, and I know you do as well, that it feels like right now has never been a better time that so many more women are stepping up and into their power and realizing that there's a different way. And this is definitely a way to get there, in my opinion.
Absolutely.
So, put a link in the show notes for everybody to figure out where they can buy the book online. Basically, anywhere where books are sold, you can find it in your part of the world. Also, Kate, you had mentioned that you have a free guide on your website, Have More by Doing Less. So that's at katenorthrup.com/book, correct?
So, katenorthup.com/book, you actually get 4 gifts when you order the book. So, you'll
Great.
get a workshop on how to set boundaries and say no, a guided workshop on implementing the 80/20 rule in your life and business, and then a masterclass with Dr. Shafali Sabari and me, who wrote Conscious Parenting and the Awakened Family, and then a masterclass with Latham Thomas and me, who is the founder of Mama Glow and the author of Owning Your Glow. So, you'll get all of those for free over at katenorthup.com/book with your purchase.
Perfect. We'll put the link in the show notes for everybody so you can check that out. And just would be remiss to not mention this. You also have a group called, a monthly membership group called the Origin Collective. Now, it's a wait list for right now, right? Because it doesn't open up until later on in the year. But I highly recommend, if anything that Kate has talked about today, you feel like the light bulbs are going on. You're like, oh, I want more. This is the place to tap into. There are about 1,000 entrepreneurs worldwide in this collective. That's incredible. And really, the core goal of your Origin Collective is really to help you learn how to infuse more feminine energy into your business and, again, reclaim your time. So, yes, be on the lookouts for that as well. So, Kate, I hate that we have to wrap up because I really would love to talk to you all day long. But there are a few questions that I like to ask all of our guests, and these are them. What is one book or blog that you're reading these days that is either inspiring you or maybe even poking holes and challenging your belief system right now?
Well, my top read of late has been Emergent Strategy by Adrienne Marie Brown. I love her concept of biomimicry and looking to the natural world to find solutions to our modern day problems. She's an activist with social change movements. However, I found the book completely applies to entrepreneurship. So check out her work. She is a revolutionary, and I am obsessed with her.
Excellent. We'll put a link in the show notes for that book as well. So we believe gratitude and simplicity go hand in hand. Tell us what's one thing you're grateful for right now in your life.
I am grateful that the days are getting warmer and the snow is melting where I am in Maine.
Amen to that, right? I'm in England. It's still not melting. It's getting there, but slowly and surely. What do you think is one superpower that you possess?
I have the ability to make people feel included and welcome. That's one of
Yeah.
my superpowers.
Yeah, and you mentioned in your book that you're definitely an extrovert and that you get energized when you speak on stage and you're around people. Yeah, I know that that's a superpower of yours as well. So tell us, who's one person in your pocket of the world that you think is doing brilliant things that we should shine a spotlight on and potentially have on the Simplifiers podcast?
Well, my friend Patricia Moreno, I love what she's up to. She's the founder of Intensati, and she's doing some incredibly important work around challenging our conversations on dieting and body and highlighting the fat phobia in our culture. She's an incredible woman. So I think she's worth a look.
Yeah, she definitely sounds like the right gal to have on next. So people can find you online at Kate Northrup. Where do you hang out the most? Instagram?
Instagram.
Okay, great. Well, again, we'll put the links there. And of course, her website is katenorthrup.com. All right, my last question for you today, Kate. And before I ask this, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge you. I think the work that you're doing is so powerful, so right on the money. And I hope that people are just like me, are going to have like, what? What? Is that been there the whole time kind of moments when they read through this book? So thank you, thank you, thank you, and keep going. I encourage you.
Thank you.
So my last question for you today is this. Somewhere, someone is listening to this episode right now, and she is feeling burnt out, crispy, and running ragged. What is one thing that you could whisper into her ear right now just to encourage her?
It's a really practical thing. Go to bed early tonight. It's just, I talk about how sleep is my spiritual practice, and I think it heals almost everything.
Yeah, get some sleep, girl.
Get some sleep.
Kate, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Thank you.